The restaurant bustled with laughter when I walked in, my arms full with the chocolate hazelnut cake that had taken me 6 hours to perfect. It was Christopher's favorite since he was 7, the year he broke his arm falling from our backyard oak tree. I'd made it every birthday since, even after the divorce. Some traditions, I believed, should remain unbroken. "Mom, you made it." Christopher's voice carried across the room, but his eyes barely met mine. At 32, he still had his father's smile, warm on the surface, calculating underneath. I scanned the elegantly arranged tables, white linens, crystal glasses, name cards written in gold calligraphy. My contribution had covered half the costs, though no one would know it. Money that could have gone toward my leaking roof, but what did that matter? This was for my son. "Where should I put the cake?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. A young waitress approached, her smile professionally sympathetic. "I can take that to the kitchen, ma'am. Your table is this way." I followed her past the main area where family was gathering, past my 3 sons and their wives, past Harry and her, past even Christopher's golden retriever wearing a party hat. We walked until we reached a small table in the back corner, surrounded by balloons and toys, the children's table. "There must be a mistake," I said. The waitress checked her notes. "Mrs. Victoria Harper, this is your assigned seat." I stood there frozen, cake still in my arms. From across the room, Christopher caught my eye. He walked over, that familiar half-smile on his face. "Is there a problem, Mom?" I thought I'd be sitting with the family. He took the cake from my hands, passing it to the waitress. "We need you back here with the kids. You know how they get without supervision." I glanced at the main table again, at the empty chair next to him, the one with a name card that read Diane, his stepmother of 15 years. "But I'm your mother." His smile didn't waver. "Relax, Mom. You've always liked being backstage. You're just going back to where you belong." The casual cruelty in his voice stole my breath. 29 years of 3 a.m. fevers, of college tuition payments made by working double shifts, of tearful phone calls after his first heartbreak, reduced to backstage presence. I forced myself to smile. "Of course, sweetheart. Whatever makes your day special." The party progressed like a play where I'd forgotten my lines. I watched from my corner as Harry, my ex-husband, proposed a toast to the son any father would be proud of. I watched as Diane adjusted Christopher's tie with the practiced affection of a mother who hadn't earned the title. My other sons, Logan and Carter, barely acknowledged me with more than a nod. I'd spent 30 years being invited to their lives as an afterthought, birthdays, graduations, weddings, always with the same explanation. Mom understands, Mom doesn't mind, Mom is reasonable. Each time, I accepted my place in the shadows, grateful just to be included. But something was different tonight. Perhaps it was the way the child. Ren at my table asked me questions about their fathers when they were young. Stories I realized they'd never heard. Perhaps it was watching Harry place his hand over Diane's, sporting the same watch I'd saved for 6 months to give him on our 10th anniversary. Or perhaps it was simply that at 58, I'd grown tired of being reasonable. I excused myself from the table and walked to my car. Inside the trunk was a polished mahogany box I'd brought on impulse, uncertain until this moment whether I would actually give it to Christopher. When I returned, they were preparing to cut the cake I'd made. I placed the box beside his plate, heart pounding. "What's this?" Christopher asked, surprise briefly replacing his rehearsed birthday cheer. "Just a little something I've been saving." "Open it." He lifted the lid cautiously. Inside were documents I'd kept hidden for decades, adoption certificates for each of my 3 boys, yellowed photographs from the orphanage, the original letter from the agency confirming our approval as adoptive parents. Christopher's hands trembled as he lifted the first certificate. The room grew quiet as others leaned in to see. "I don't understand," he whispered. "You were 9 months old when you came to us," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "Your brothers followed, each a year apart." The agency said it was unusual to approve 3 adoptions so quickly, but we were determined. We're adopted. Logan stood now, moving closer. All of us. Harry had gone pale, his arm rigid around Diane's shoulders. Yes, I continued. Your father wanted biological children, but I couldn't conceive. When I insisted on adoption, it became a point of contention. The silence was deafening as understanding dawned on their faces. The narrative they'd been told, that I was difficult, unreasonable, that Harry had no choice but to find happiness elsewhere, began to crack. There's more, I said, gesturing toward the box. Christopher pulled out legal documents, his eyes widening as he scanned the pages. This is property documentation for land in Westlake County, I nodded. My grandparents' farm, 500 acres that's been in the family for generations. I recently learned that a developer wants to build a resort there. They've offered $17 million. I watched their expressions shift from shock to calculation, a transformation so swift it confirmed what I'd feared most. I came tonight planning to tell you that I was dividing it equally among you boys, I continued, taking back the papers from Christopher's suddenly gentle hands. But now I see things more clearly. I tucked the documents into my purse, a strange calm settling over me. For 30 years, I'd lived in the margins of my own life, measuring my worth through what I gave rather than what I received. I'd convinced myself that sacrifice was love. Not anymore. Mom, Christopher began, his voice softer than I'd heard in years. We had no idea about the adoption, about Dad leaving because I chose you. I finished for him. And I'd make that choice again 1,000 times. Money, though, that's a different choice entirely. I turned to leave, ignoring the chorus of voices suddenly calling my name. After decades of invisibility, it was remarkable how quickly they could see me now. At the doorway, I paused. The question burning in everyone's mind hung in the air, unasked. What would I do with the money? Now, the truth was I wasn't entirely sure, but for the first time in 30 years, I would decide based solely on what I wanted. That part of my life, living for others who didn't value my presence, was over. As I walked out into the cool evening air, one thought burned brighter than all others. Freedom had never tasted so sweet or come with such a hefty price tag. My phone rang 17 times on the drive home. Christopher, Logan, Carter, even Harry. Suddenly, everyone needed to speak with me urgently. I silenced each call, hands steady on the steering wheel as streetlights blurred through tears I refused to shed. When I pulled into my driveway, the modest one-bedroom rental I'd moved into after the divorce looked different somehow. For 15 years, I'd apologized for its size when my sons visited. It's just me, I don't need much space, as if my solitude were something shameful. Tonight, its humble walls offered sanctuary. Inside, I kicked off my shoes and poured myself a glass of wine, not the cheap brand I usually bought, but the expensive Merlot I'd been saving for a special occasion. If reclaiming my life wasn't special enough, what was? I sat at my small kitchen table and spread out the property documents. My grandparents' farm had been in our family for 4 generations. When they passed, they left it to me, their only granddaughter. The land had been leased to local farmers for decades, generating just enough income to cover property taxes, until 3 months ago, when a resort developer discovered that the property's hilltop offered spectacular views of the lake that had been created by a new dam project. $17 million, a number so large it felt fictional. My first instinct had been to divide it among my sons, their inheritance, security for their futures, college funds for my grandchildren. I'd even drafted a letter to include with Christopher's birthday gift, explaining how the money would be distributed. Now, that letter lay crumpled in my purse, replaced by a question I'd never allowed myself to ask. What do I want? The doorbell rang, startling me from my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw Christopher standing on my porch, still in his birthday party clothes. Behind him, Logan and Carter waited near their cars. I considered pretending I wasn't home, but they'd seen my car in the driveway. With a deep breath, I opened the door. Mom, Christopher's voice was conciliatory, his eyes red-rimmed. Can we talk? I stepped aside to let him in, noticing how he scanned my small living room with new interest, as if searching for other hidden treasures. Your brothers are outside. Should I invite them in too? I nodded, and soon all three of my sons were perched awkwardly on my second-hand furniture, looking like strangers in a place they'd visited countless times before. You left so suddenly, Carter began. At 29, my youngest had always been the peacemaker. We were worried. Were you? I asked quietly. Or were you worried about what would happen to the money? The silence that followed was answer enough. Mom, that's not fair, Logan said, leaning forward. You dropped a bombshell tonight. We're adopted. Dad left because of us, and now there's this inheritance your father left because he couldn't accept that our family wouldn't share his DNA. I corrected him. He managed to convince all of you over time that I was the unreasonable one. Christopher cleared his throat. Dad said you were impossible to live with after we came, that you became obsessed with being the perfect mother and didn't care about being a wife anymore. A bitter laugh escaped me. Is that what he told you? That I loved you too much. He said you pushed him away, Carter added quietly. What I did, I said carefully, was refuse to apologize for choosing you three when he demanded I choose between my children and my marriage. But that's ancient history now. Logan stood and walked to the window, his reflection troubled in the glass. Why didn't you ever tell us we were adopted? The question hung heavy in the air. The truth was complicated, a mixture of fear, love, and Harry's insistence, even after the divorce, that the boys didn't need to know. At first, we planned to tell you when you were older. Then your father left, and I was struggling just to keep our lives together. As time passed, it seemed less and less important. You were my sons. Biology didn't matter. But it must have mattered to Dad, Christopher said. I nodded. It mattered to him very much. The room fell silent again. In that moment, I saw three grown men grappling with a shifted reality, the father they'd idolized suddenly cast in a different light. About the land, Carter finally said, voice careful. 17 million is life-changing. And there it was, the real reason for their late-night visit. Yes, it is, I agreed. Life-changing for me. Christopher's head snapped up. What does that mean? It means I'm 58 years old. I've spent 2/3 of my life putting everyone else first. I worked 2 jobs to put you all through college. I never remarried because dating took time away from being available whenever you needed me. I've lived in this tiny rental because most of my savings went to helping with down payments on your houses, wedding costs, even the restaurant tonight. I took a breath, surprising myself with my calm. I don't regret any of it, but tonight when I saw that I didn't even merit a seat at my own son's birthday table, I realized something important. Sacrifice without recognition eventually becomes erasure. Mom, about the seating. Christopher began. I held up my hand. I'm not finished. For 30 years, I've lived as if my only value was what I could give to others. That ends tonight. So you're punishing us because of a seating chart? Ogun's voice held an edge I recognized, his father's indignation. When denied something he expected, no, I'm choosing myself for the first time since you boys came into my life. The money is mine, and I'm going to use it to build the life I've put on hold for decades. All of it? Carter asked, shock evident in his voice. I haven't decided yet, I said honestly, but my decision won't be driven by guilt or obligation. Christopher stood, his face hardening. This isn't like you, Mom. You've always put family first. That's exactly my point, I replied. You've never known the real me, the woman who exists beyond motherhood. Neither have I, for that matter. They left an hour later, their departing hugs stiff with unresolved tension. As their cars disappeared down the street, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I hadn't seen in years. Victoria, it's Harry. We need to talk about what happened tonight. There are things you don't understand. I stared at the message, feeling a familiar pull, the instinct to smooth things over, to make peace, to retreat into the background where I'd always been most comfortable. Instead, I typed, I understand perfectly. For the first time in 30 years, then I blocked his number. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in decades. When I woke, the morning light streaming through my window felt different, brighter somehow. I made coffee and carried it to my small balcony, where a hummingbird hovered near the feeder I'd hung last spring. I'd spent so long being invisible that I'd forgotten how it felt to be seen. Now, with millions of dollars at my fingertips and decades of deferred dreams waiting to be fulfilled, I faced a question both terrifying and exhilarating. Who would I become when I finally stepped out of my own shadow? Before I could contemplate the answer, my doorbell rang again. When I opened it, I found myself face to face with someone I never expected to see, someone whose presence threatened everything about my newfound resolve. Diane, her name fell from my lips like a stone. My ex-husband's wife stood on my doorstep, immaculately dressed even at 9 a.m., not a strand of honey blonde hair out of place. The woman who had replaced me in Harry's life and somehow in my son's hearts too. "Victoria," she said with a tight smile, "may I come in?" Every instinct told me to shut the door, but curiosity won out. In 15 years, Diane had never once visited my home. I stepped aside, watching as she surveyed my modest living room with the same calculating gaze I'd seen in my son's eyes the night before. "Coffee?" I offered, more from habit than hospitality. "No, thank you. This won't take long." She perched on the edge of my sofa, handbag clutched on her lap like a shield. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I'd spent years imagining this woman as a villain, the homewrecker, the replacement mother, the reason my marriage had fallen apart. Now, sitting across from her, I saw something unexpected: nervousness. "Harry told me about last night," she finally said, "about the adoption. About the land. Did he also tell you why he left?" I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. She looked down at her perfectly manicured hands. "He said you two wanted different things." That's one way of putting it. He wanted biological children. I couldn't have them. When I chose adoption, he chose to leave. Diane's eyes widened slightly. "That's not." "He said you became obsessed with the boys, that you pushed him away." I gave a hollow laugh. "Is that the story you've been telling my sons all these years? No wonder they think I belong at the children's table." She had the grace to look embarrassed. "Victoria, I didn't come here to argue about the past. I came because the boys are devastated. They've been up all night trying to make sense of everything, and Harry sent you to smooth things over, to convince me to share my inheritance." "He doesn't know I'm here," she said quietly. That surprised me. In the few interactions we'd had over the years, Diane had always deferred to Harry, echoing his opinions, backing his decisions. The woman sitting before me now seemed different somehow, less certain, more genuine. "Then why are you here?" I asked. She took a deep breath. "Because I know what it's like to live in someone else's shadow." I stared at her, unsure how to respond. "You think you're the only one who's disappeared," she continued. "You've been the saint all these years, the selfless mother who sacrificed everything for her boys. Do you know what that makes me? The villain, the stepmother who could never measure up." "You took my place," I said, the old hurt rising. "At the dinner table at graduations in my sons' lives. I filled a vacancy Harry created," she corrected. "And I've spent 15 years trying to be what everyone needed, the perfect wife, the supportive stepmother. Do you know what the boys call me behind my back? Dad's trophy wife, as if I have no value beyond how I look on Harry's arm." For the first time, I really looked at Diane, not as my replacement, but as a woman. The careful makeup couldn't quite hide the lines of fatigue around her eyes. The perfect posture spoke of constant vigilance. I recognized the signs because I'd carried them too, the weight of always being measured against an impossible standard. "What does Harry think about the land?" I asked her. Her laugh was surprisingly bitter. "What do you think?" "He says it should go to the boys, that it's their birthright." "They're not even biologically related to my family," I pointed out. "He said it doesn't matter. They're Harpers by name, and the land is Harper land." I shook my head. Of course he'd say that. Harry has always believed he's entitled to things that don't belong to him. Something flickered in Diane's eyes, recognition perhaps, or resignation. "The boys are going to fight you on this," she said, "especially Christopher. He's already talking about challenging the property rights, claiming you're not mentally competent." The betrayal stung, even though it shouldn't have surprised me. He'd declare his own mother incompetent for money. "He's his father's son." "Their son," Diane said simply. We sat in silence for a moment, two women united by the men who had shaped and, in many ways, diminished our lives. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked. She stood smoothing her skirt. "Maybe I'm tired of watching women disappear, or maybe," she paused, "maybe I need to know it's possible to start over." As she reached the door, she turned back. "Whatever you decide to do with the money, Victoria, make it count." After she left, I sat motionless, replaying our conversation. In 15 years of imagining confrontations with Diane, I'd never once considered we might have anything in common. My phone buzzed with a text from Christopher. "Dad says we need to talk. Family dinner at our house tonight, 7 p.m. The presumption in those words, that I would simply appear when summoned, that family included Harry but positioned me as an outsider, ignited something in me. For decades, I'd been diminished by the very people I'd sacrificed everything for. Not anymore. I texted back, "I have plans tonight. I'll be in touch when I'm ready to discuss next steps." Then I opened my laptop and did something I'd been putting off for years. I started writing not the children's book I'd always dreamed of publishing, but a letter to my lawyer, to my financial advisor, and most importantly, to myself. By noon, I had a plan. First, I called Sebastian Levine, an attorney I'd consulted briefly during my divorce. Unlike the lawyer Harry had pressured me to use, Sebastian had a reputation for being ruthlessly effective. "Victoria Harper," he said when he answered. "It's been, 15 years? Too long." I agreed. "Sebastian, I need your help with something complicated." 2 hours later, I left his office with a clarity I hadn't felt in decades. The property would be sold, but on my terms. A portion of the proceeds, $3 million, would be placed in a trust for my grandchildren's education. Not a penny would go directly to my sons until they demonstrated they could see me as more than a convenient resource. The rest would fund my second act, a life I'd put on hold for 30 years. Walking back to my car, I felt lighter. The future stretched before me, undefined but full of possibility. I would travel, perhaps buy a small house by the ocean. For the first time since my sons were placed in my arms, I allowed myself to dream of a life that centered on my own happiness. That evening, as I packed an overnight bag, my phone exploded with messages. My decision to skip the family meeting had apparently caused an uproar. Harry's messages grew increasingly demanding. The boys alternated between guilt trips and thinly veiled threats about legal action. I silenced my phone and placed it in a drawer. Whatever storm they were brewing could wait. Tonight belonged to me. The drive to the coast took 3 hours. I'd booked a room at a small beachfront hotel, nothing extravagant, but a step up from my usual budget accommodations. As I checked in, the receptionist handed me a room key and a complimentary glass of champagne. I was celebrating something special when she asked. I smiled. A new beginning. In my room, I opened the balcony doors to the sound of waves crashing against the shore. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, vast and unknowable like the future. I was finally allowing myself to claim my newfound peace. It lasted exactly 2 hours and 17 minutes. Then a knock at my door shattered the tranquility I'd been savoring. When I opened it, I found myself facing not just one unexpected visitor, but 3, my sons, standing shoulder to shoulder with expressions that turned my blood cold. "We need to talk, Mom," Christopher said, pushing past me into the room. Now, behind him, Logan closed the door with an ominous click. The small hotel room suddenly felt claustrophobic. My 3 sons, men I'd raised with every ounce of love I possessed, now loomed before me like strangers. Christopher paced near the window, Carter stood awkwardly by the bathroom door, and Logan positioned himself between me and the exit. "How did you find me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Find my phone," Christopher said flatly. "You never turned off the family sharing after you helped Carter set it up last Christmas." Of course, in my rush for independence, I'd forgotten the digital tethers still binding us together. "What's this about?" I already knew the answer, but I needed to hear them say it. "We saw Sebastian Levine," Logan said, his voice tight. "He's always had a reputation for being ruthless in court." "He's an attorney," I replied. I needed legal advice. Christopher stopped pacing to face me. "Legal advice on how to cut your own sons out of their inheritance? On how to deny your own grandchildren their birthright?" There it was, the entitlement Harry had cultivated in them for years, the belief that what was mine was automatically theirs. "I'm not cutting anyone out," I said carefully. "I'm establishing a college fund for my grandchildren. The rest is mine to use as I see fit. $3 million in a trust that we can't access until the kids are 18? Carter interjected. "While you keep $14 million for yourself. How is that fair?" I looked at my youngest son, always the most sensitive, the one I thought might understand. The hurt in his eyes was genuine, but so was the greed. "Fair," I repeated. "Was it fair when you all let your father convince you I was the villain in our divorce? Was it fair when you scheduled family vacations without inviting me? Was it fair when your father walked out because I chose to adopt you boys?" "That's ancient history, Mom," Christopher said dismissively. "This is about now, about our family's future." "No," I said, finding strength in my anger. "This is about the fact that all three of you see me as nothing more than a resource to be used, a wallet, a babysitter, a convenient background character in your lives." Logan stepped closer. "That's not true. We love you." "Do you?" I challenged. "When was the last time any of you called me just to talk? Came over for dinner without needing a favor? Remembered my birthday without a reminder from your wife?" The silence that followed was damning. "We've all been busy," Carter offered weakly. "Too busy to treat your mother like a person worthy of respect?" I shook my head. "Last night confirmed what I've suspected for years. You see me as your father does, useful when needed, invisible when not." Christopher's face hardened. "If this is about the seating at my birthday, it's about 30 years of being treated as an afterthought," I interrupted. "The seating was just the final straw." "So you're punishing us," Logan said. "Taking away our inheritance because of hurt feelings?" I looked at my middle son, the one who'd most fully embraced Harry's worldview. "This isn't punishment, it's consequence. For the first time, I'm putting myself first. If that feels like punishment to you, perhaps you should examine why you believe you're entitled to something that was never promised to you." Christopher moved toward the door. "Dad warned us this might happen," he said. "You've always been emotional, making decisions based on feelings rather than what's right for the family." The familiar words, Harry's words, sparked something in me, not anger, but clarity. "Your father," I said quietly, "has spent decades convincing you that I'm the unreasonable one." "Did he also tell you that when the adoption agency called about you, Christopher, he wanted to say no? That he argued we should keep trying for real children instead?" Christopher's face paled. "Or that when Logan came along a year later, he didn't come to the adoption ceremony because he was too busy at work? Or that by the time we adopted Carter, he was already seeing Diane?" "You're lying," Logan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Check the dates on those adoption papers," I said, "then ask your father when he started dating Diane." The room fell silent as my words sank in. For the first time, I saw doubt creep into their expressions, doubt about the narrative they'd accepted for so long. "I have never lied to you boys," I continued softly. "I've protected you, even when it meant protecting you from the truth about your father. But I won't protect you from the truth about yourselves anymore. You've become men who would threaten your own mother over money, who would track her down when she needed space, who would put property rights above relationship." "We're not threatening you," Carter protested. "Really? Then why are you here blocking my exit, talking about challenging my decisions in court?" None of them answered. "I want you to leave," I said firmly. "I'll be in touch when I've made my final decisions about the property, But until then, I need space. Christopher's jaw tightened. If you do this, if you keep the money for yourself, you'll lose us. Is that what you want? To end up alone. The threat hung in the air between us. For decades, my greatest fear had been losing my children's love. Harry had wielded that fear like a weapon during our divorce, knowing it would keep me compliant, accepting less than I deserved. I've been alone for years, I said, meeting his gaze. The difference now is that I'm choosing it rather than having it forced upon me. Something shifted in Christopher's expression, surprise, perhaps, or the first glimmer of respect. We should go, Carter said quietly. Give Mom some time. Christopher hesitated, then nodded. One by one, they filed out, leaving behind a silence that felt more like relief than emptiness. When the door closed, I sank onto the bed, trembling but unbowed. For the first time in decades, I'd stood my ground. I'd spoken my truth without softening it to protect their feelings. I'd chosen myself. My phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. It's Diane. Harry knows the boys went to see you. He's furious. Be careful. The warning sent a chill through me. Harry had always been charming in public, calculating in private. When crossed, his vengeance could be subtle but devastating. I texted back, "Thank you for the warning." Her response came seconds later. "I'm starting to understand why you're doing this. Maybe it's time I found my voice too." I stared at those words, wondering what they meant for Diane and for me. Could two women who had spent years as unwitting rivals become allies? Before I could contemplate this further, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Sebastian Levine. "Victoria," he said when I answered, his voice tense. "We have a problem. Someone's been making inquiries about your competency with your doctor. They're trying to build a case that you're emotionally unstable and unfit to manage your assets." My hand tightened around the phone. "Harry, most likely. But Victoria, there's something else. I've been looking into your adoption records, and there's an irregularity I think you should know about." "What kind of irregularity?" His hesitation was palpable, even through the phone, the kind that changes everything. "I think you should come back to town immediately. This isn't a conversation we should have over the phone." As I hung up, a strange mixture of dread and determination washed over me. Whatever Harry was planning, whatever secrets still lurked in my past, I would face them head-on. No more hiding, no more apologizing for claiming what was rightfully mine. I packed my bag and checked out of the hotel, the peaceful getaway cut short by the machinations of a man who couldn't stand losing control. As I drove back toward town, the setting sun cast long shadows across the highway, reminders of how darkness can stretch and distort reality. But I was no longer afraid of shadows, even my own. Whatever awaited me back home, I would meet it as the woman I was becoming, not the ghost I had been. Sebastian Levine's office felt too small for the magnitude of what he was about to tell me. He sat across his desk, a manila folder opened before him, his expression grave. "When I started reviewing your adoption records," he began, "I noticed something unusual. The timeline didn't match what you told me." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He slid a document toward me, Christopher's original adoption certificate. "You said Harry was reluctant about the adoptions, especially. Christopher argued against it right up until we brought him home." Sebastian pointed to a signature at the bottom of the page. "This is dated 3 weeks before the adoption was finalized. It's a consent form signed by Harry, not just agreeing to the adoption, but actively advocating for it." I stared at the familiar signature, confusion washing over me. "That's impossible. Harry fought me on every step of the adoption process." "There's more." Sebastian pulled out another document. "This is from the adoption agency's case files. It indicates that Harry was the one who initiated contact with them, not you." The room seemed to tilt sideways. "But that can't be right. Harry wanted biological children. When I couldn't conceive, he blamed me. He made it clear adoption was my choice, not his. According to these records," Sebastian said gently, "Harry was the primary applicant. Your signature appears later in the process." My mind raced backward through decades of memories, searching for something that would explain this contradiction. Harry's voice echoed in my thoughts. You're the one who wanted this, Victoria. You chose these children over our marriage. There's something else, Sebastian continued, pulling out a third document, medical records from before your first adoption. They indicate you underwent fertility treatments paid for by Harry's health insurance. Yes, we tried for years to have children. The treatments failed. Victoria, Sebastian said carefully, these records show the treatments were successful. You became pregnant. The air left my lungs in a rush. That's not possible. I never. But even as I spoke, a memory surfaced, hazy and dreamlike, a hospital room, pain, Harry's face tight with an emotion I couldn't name. According to this, Sebastian continued, you miscarried in your second trimester. The trauma was severe. You required surgery and spent nearly 2 weeks in the hospital. I shook my head, my hands trembling. I don't remember any of this. The medical notes mentioned post-traumatic amnesia. It's possible the experience was so traumatic that you blocked it out, and it seems Harry encouraged that forgetting. He lied to me. My voice sounded distant even to my own ears. For 30 years, the records suggest something more complex. Sebastian's voice gentled. After the miscarriage, you suffered from severe depression. When you started discussing adoption, Harry seemed to believe it was the only way to help you heal. But he also apparently decided it would be better if you believed adoption was entirely your idea, something you fought for rather than something born from tragedy. I pressed my hands against my temples, trying to make sense of it all. So he let me believe I couldn't have children, that he resented me for choosing adoption, that he left because I wasn't enough. It appears so, Sebastian confirmed. And when he left, he continued the narrative that you had pushed him away with your obsession over the adoptions. A cold clarity descended over me. He used my love for my children against me. He made me the villain in his story and eventually in my son's stories too. There's one more thing. Sebastian hesitated. The medical records indicate that after the miscarriage, additional complications meant you wouldn't be able to conceive again. Harry knew this, but he let you believe you were still trying. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not for Harry, not anymore. Does this change anything about the land? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Sebastian shook his head. The property is still legally yours to do with as you wish, but I thought you should know the truth before making any final decisions about your son's inheritance. I thanked him and left, the documents heavy in my bag. Outside, the world continued as if nothing had changed, though everything had. I drove aimlessly, memories flickering at the edges of my consciousness, fragments I'd suppressed for decades, a positive pregnancy test, Harry's face glowing with joy, then darkness, pain, loss. Eventually, I found myself parked outside Harry's house, the sprawling suburban home where he lived with Diane, where my sons had spent weekends and holidays after the divorce, where the narrative of my failure as a wife had been written and reinforced. I don't know how long I sat there before his Mercedes pulled into the driveway. He emerged wearing a golf shirt, his hair grayer than I remembered, but his posture still radiating the confidence of a man who believed he controlled his world. When he spotted my car, he froze momentarily, then walked over. I rolled down my window. "Victoria," he said, his voice carrying that familiar note of condescension. "The boys told me about your emotional state. I think we should talk." Yes, I agreed, we should. Inside his house, I perched on the edge of an armchair while Harry poured himself a drink. Diane was nowhere to be seen. "Where's your wife?" I asked. A flash of irritation crossed his face. "Visiting her sister. We had a disagreement." I wondered if that disagreement had anything to do with the warning text she'd sent me. "I understand you've been making inquiries with my doctor," I said. "Trying to have me declared incompetent?" He didn't bother denying it. "I'm concerned about your mental state. These rash decisions about the inheritance, this sudden vendetta against your own family, it's not like you, Victoria." "No," I agreed, "it's not like the Victoria you created." The woman who believed she wasn't enough, who thought she had to earn love through sacrifice, who accepted blame for things that were never her fault. I pulled the medical records from my bag and placed them on the coffee table between us. Harry's face drained of color. "I remember now," I said quietly. "Not everything, but enough. The baby we lost, the lie you cultivated for 30 years. "I was trying to protect you," he said, but the words rang hollow. "You were protecting yourself," I corrected. "You couldn't handle my grief, so you redirected it. You made me believe adoption was my crusade, not our shared healing. You punished me for embracing the very life you helped create." His expression hardened. "You have no idea what I went through watching you fall apart, trying to hold everything together. And you have no idea what it's like to be unmade by someone you trust," he said. I replied, "To be told a story about yourself so convincingly that you believe it's true, to spend decades apologizing for choices you didn't even make." We sat in silence, 30 years of unspoken truths hanging between us. "The boys deserve their inheritance," he finally said. "Whatever happened between us, they're innocent." I stood, gathering the documents. "Our sons are many things, Harry, but innocent isn't one of them. They're the men you raised them to be, entitled, manipulative, and willing to threaten their own mother for money." "So you'll punish them for my sins?" he asked. "No," I said. "I'll teach them what you never did, that love isn't transactional, that women aren't resources to be depleted, and that consequences aren't the same as punishment." As I turned to leave, he called after me, "If you do this, you'll lose them forever." "Is that what you want?" "To be alone." I paused at the door. I was alone even when surrounded by all of you. At least now it's a solitude I've chosen. Outside, the evening air felt clean, purifying. I drove to the small cafe where I'd arranged to meet my sons. They were already there, 3 men with Harry's eyes and my stubborn chin, wearing expressions that shifted from defiance to uncertainty as I sat down. "I've made my decision about the inheritance," I began without preamble. "The land will be sold. 3 million will go into trusts for your children's education, not controlled by you, but by independent trustees." Christopher started to protest, but I held up my hand. "The rest will be used to establish a foundation for women rebuilding their lives after divorce or domestic violence. I'll be running it. And before you argue that I'm not qualified, remember that I rebuilt my life with 3 young boys and no support after your father left." "Mom," Carter began. "I'm not finished," I continued. "Each of you will have the opportunity to sit on the foundation's board, to be part of something meaningful, something larger than your own self-interest. But first, you'll need to earn back my trust." I placed the folder of medical records on the table. "Inside is the truth about your adoptions, about your father's role in them, and about the lies he's told for 30 years. Read it, understand it, then decide who you want to be, men like your father or men worthy of the sacrifice it took to make you my sons." I stood to leave, but Logan caught my wrist. "What if we don't want to be either of those things? What if we just want to be ourselves?" For the first time in days, I smiled genuinely. That Logan would be the greatest outcome I could hope for. As I walked away, I felt lighter than I had in decades, no longer a shadow, but a woman stepping fully into the light of her own making.